Welcome to Ayurveda and Spirituality with your host, Alakananda Ma, a renowned Ayurvedic expert and a graduate of a top London medical school. She is the principal of Alundi Ayurveda Gurukula, a unique apprenticeship-style school in Boulder, Colorado. She is a spiritual mother, teacher, flower essence maker, and storyteller. Join us as we uncover the timeless principles of Ayurveda, discover practical tips for enhancing vitality, and explore the deeper dimensions of spirituality that intertwine with the ancient science of life.
Namaste, everyone. Today, as promised, we are going to take a little look at Palestinian liberation theology. Specifically, we're going to look at the document Kairos II. Let's start with a quote from Kairos II, a couple quotes. "We are witnesses to the resurrection and to the empty tomb, from which the light of life burst forth. We believe that the final word belongs not to death, but to life. Not to darkness, but to light. Not to injustice, but to truth. We look toward the day when we shall live free in our land, together with all the inhabitants of the earth, in true peace and reconciliation, founded upon justice and equality for all God's creation, where mercy and truth meet, and righteousness and peace kiss each other." So the document Kairos Palestine II is actually in the news lately because in July of this year, the Church of England General Synod voted to, quote-unquote, hear and engage with the Kairos Palestine documents, including Kairos Palestine II, expressing solidarity with Palestinian Christians amid intense public debate and criticism from Jewish leaders. So the motion passed in July. It was originally a proposal to receive the documents, and the ultimate decision was to hear them as lived experiences. The church leaders emphasized that studying or hearing the text is not the same as adopting the document as official church doctrine or legally endorsing all its political claims. And in the final motion, they made the call for rejecting anti-Semitism as well as anti-Muslim hostility and maintaining interfaith dialogue and, divestment, reviewing church investment policies based on international legal frameworks. Well, this provoked an immediate response from Britain's Chief Rabbi, Sir Ephraim Mirvis, and other critics. They were furious, arguing that Kairos Palestine presents a one-sided political narrative, speaking of its harsh rhetoric regarding the state of Israel. Supporters in the Anglican Church maintain the Church has a moral duty to listen to the cries, pain, and the distinct suffering that local Palestinian Christians are communicating. So, that's what has brought Kairos Palestine into the news, is the fact that the Church of England is going to hear it, and that has caused a stir among British Jewry. What's special about Palestinian liberation theology? It begins actually with the first Kairos Palestine document in 2009, and then Kairos II from November 14th, 2025. This one is titled The Kairos Palestine, the Palestinian Christian Initiative, a moment of truth. Kairos is a moment. Faith in a time of genocide. So that those Kairos Palestine documents, 1 and 2, are key documents for Palestinian liberation theology, but we also have the writings of Patriarch Michael Saba, who was the first native Palestinian Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, and he served from 1987 to 2008, and he has really been the theological architect of Catholic Palestinian liberation theology. And he makes a point that we have so often made ourselves, that Israel cannot be secure unless Palestinians have freedom and justice. That is so true. And the church needs to oppose structural violence. Then there are thinkers like Father John Malkada, who've been contextualizing the gospel from a Palestinian perspective. And we looked at that a bit last time, all of the new viewpoint of decolonizing the Bible, starting to read the Bible not from a colonial or colonizer perspective, but from a Palestinian perspective. And this goes along with the geography of salvation, that the Holy Land is a living landscape where local Christians bear witness to Christ, even in the midst of current political strife. We're going to talk more about this geography of salvation in a subsequent podcast, where we will look at the Holy Land as a fifth gospel. There are also prophetic collective statements from beloved leaders like Cardinal Pier Battista Pizzaballa. A future cannot be built on captivity, oppression of the Palestinians. It's also very important that there's a wonderful connection between Palestinian liberation theology and Catholic social teaching. The first liberation theology I learned about, of course, was the liberation theology of Latin America, which got in trouble for using a Marxist framework. I like it, but a lot don't. Palestinian liberation theology really intersects with the basic principles of Catholic social teaching: human dignity, the common good, subsidiarity, solidarity, and the option for the poor and vulnerable. So when we dive into the text of Kairos II, we see that it doesn't mince words, that was what was really, so to say, hinted at or alluded to by the Chief Rabbi of the British Jews, Sir Ephraim Mirvis, using the language of harsh rhetoric regarding the state of Israel. The choice of words is not diplomatic. Kairos II does not mince words, and its tone is one of outrage. An outrage that many of us hear, many of us in Jewish Voices for Peace, many of us in Christians for a Free Palestine, many of us feel here on a daily basis. Here's a quote. Zionists do not want us to remain on our land. Their plan for us is displacement, death, or submission. The genocidal war on Gaza is the continuation of the Zionist project to seize all of Palestine, emptied of its Palestinian people. Ethnic cleansing and the denial of the right of return to those forcibly displaced are ongoing policies practiced in Jerusalem, the West Bank, Gaza, and the territories of 1948. The Nakba of our people is a daily reality. The Nakba wasn't just in 1948. The Nakba has never ended. This genocide has been carried out by Israel after decades of apartheid, settler colonialism, political repression, and the deliberate policy of killing any possibility of a political solution, including the two-state solution. Exposed today is the true face of Zionist ideology, a system that over decades has entrenched an organized and sophisticated regime of apartheid, supported by advanced technologies that exercise total control over every aspect of Palestinian life, fragmenting the land, yes, dividing its people, well, yes, and turning Palestinian existence into an unbearable hell. Israel's so-called nation-state law of 2018 embodies Zionist racism and arrogant Jewish supremacy in Palestine, making apartheid a lived reality. And then Israel's decision to annex the West Bank has further exposed the true intent of this colonial project. So you can see they don't mince words. It's not diplomatic. It's not in NBC, and phrases like arrogant Jewish supremacy are loaded. But the problem is, it's what so many of us see. So many of us see that the plan is for displacement, death, or submission of Palestinians. Genocide is not one-sided language. B'Tselem and many Jewish, Israeli human rights organizations, many Jewish and Israeli professors of Holocaust studies and professors of genocide studies stand together to say that this is a genocide. It's a genocide. It actually is a genocide, so using the word genocide is not really loaded. It's just a fact. And when we use the word genocide, genocide comes with the obligation of every human being to mobilize against genocide. Not just nation states, but every one of us must stand up against genocide. Ethnic cleansing? Well, yes, it just happens to be true. Unfortunately, settler colonialism in our previous podcast, A Land Without a People, on Zionism and the Church, we really traced how it is, and avowedly is, settler colonialism. The two-state solution could, I don't think it's even on life support. It could really not be more dead. And apartheid? Yes, it is apartheid, because there are two roads. The well-made, smooth and fast road for the Jewish Israeli settlers, and the bumpy and bad road with many checkpoints for the Palestinians. Kairos II is also outspoken about Europe's hypocrisy. Let's quote, "The genocidal war," remember, that's not really biased language, it's a fact. "The genocidal war has laid bare the hypocrisy of the Western world, its hollow values and its empty boasts of commitment to human rights and international law. In truth, the Western world has sacrificed us, revealing racism and double standards toward our people." How I wish this were not true. I, who love to see the flag of the EU, who love to listen to the beautiful anthem of the EU, who cried when Britain voted to leave the EU, how I wish these words about the hollow values and the empty boasts of the Western world were not true, and how clearly we can all see that this is true. Kairos II also expresses a deep sense of betrayal in regard to Christian Zionism. Quote, "We Palestinian Christians are deeply shocked by the positions of many churches that either adopted the colonizers' narrative or remained silent in the face of the genocide of our people. At times they prioritize Jewish-Christian interfaith dialogue over truth, human dignity, and life itself, ignoring the context. They judge one side and excuse the other, or simply remain silent. Some even go so far as to take positions complicit in, supportive of, or calling for genocide. It is a real betrayal of the descendants of the original churches, the Palestinian Christians who have been there since the time of Christ. It is deeply shocking. And it's even more shocking now that we're starting to see the creep of Catholic Zionism. Christian Zionism, as we're used to it, depends on dispensationalism and that kind of theology you will not find in the Catholic Church. But we talked a few podcasts back about anti-Semitism in the Catholic Church. We talked about the Church's role in creating and fostering anti-Semitism, the Church's role in the suffering of the European Jews. There is immense guilt. There's the supersessionism, the idea that, we've taken over your covenant. Now we have a new covenant and yours is old and gone. But then on the other hand, the creep of a Catholic Christian Zionism. And when I looked at some of the things that Catholic Christian Zionists are saying, I find that it's also very patronizing towards Jews. Honestly, because they're only taking whatever Zionists are giving them, and Zionism is not Judaism, and they are not listening to the actual theology of actual Judaism, that the Jews cannot return to the land until Mashiach comes, and Jews do not accept that Jesus was Mashiach, the Messiah. So Mashiach hasn't come, and whatever the state of Israel is, it's not the return to the land that is only going to happen when Mashiach comes. And the Jewish people are supposed to remain in exile, and there is a whole theology of exile, and I find it profoundly patronizing and superficial that people who have a deep understanding of Catholic theology have not made the effort to really look at Jewish theology and see that Zionism is not Judaism and there is no real Zionist theology. So that's Kairos II's sense of betrayal in regard to Christian Zionism. The next burning point that is made by Kairos II is, in my words, that international law lies buried beneath the rubble of Gaza. This is my words. They say in Kairos, we are now living in a new era, an age in which might makes right and peace is imposed through military power in defiance of international law and the rulings of legitimate international courts. We reaffirm our commitment to the respect and authority of international law, which guarantees human rights and global peace among nations and peoples. This moment in human history demands a faith-based stance, one that speaks truth to power and tyranny, one that speaks truth to power and tyranny without compromise or evasion, reaching beyond the Palestinian experience. This is truly a moment of truth. And this didn't even begin with Palestine, the genocide in Gaza. It began with Syria. In Syria, we saw no consequences for bombing hospitals. In Syria, we saw no consequences for destroying civilian infrastructure. In Syria, we saw no consequences for killing medical workers, no consequences for double-tap strikes that would kill white helmets, no consequences for every war crime and every violation of international humanitarian law. And all the tyrants read from the same playbook, and Israel sees that it will have no consequences. No consequences. Reaching beyond the Palestinian experience. This is indeed a moment of truth. So these are bitter pills to swallow. With a tone of outrage, we hear of genocide, apartheid, and settler colonialism, words we wish were not even in our vocabulary. We hear of the hypocrisy of Europe, the shocking betrayal of all the Christian churches. We hear of an era in which might makes right, and the time has come to ask, how can we resist? First, Kairos addresses this to the Palestinian people, saying, this is a time for resistance embodied in costly steadfastness, and I think that translates the Arabic word sumud, in costly steadfastness on our land, in the face of every attempt at displacement, annexation, and genocide. A resistance lived out in our unity, cooperation, and commitment to our faith, national principles, and all our rights. To hold on to faith and hope is resistance. To pray is resistance. To safeguard the holy places is resistance. To preserve social peace is resistance. The resistance of costly steadfastness in holding on to our faith, as we see in the Church of the Holy Family in Gaza, as we see in Taipei, in the West Bank. To hold on to faith and hope is resistance. To pray is resistance. To safeguard the holy places is resistance. To preserve social peace is resistance. They go on to say, in addressing ourselves, we say, we are the sons and daughters of the first church, descendants of the apostles and the saints of the first Christian centuries, those who cultivated this land, built its citizen villages, and drank from its waters. We do not live on the margins of this land. We are woven into its fabric. This is extremely important because nowadays we tend to think of Palestinians as Muslims. We tend to think of this as a conflict between Muslims and Jews. But Kairos II is clearly stating that Christians, Palestinian Christians, will not be marginalized. We do not live on the margins of this land. We are woven into its fabric. We carry its history and heritage. Its very soil knows us as its own. Many empires have passed over this land and disappeared, buried in the dust of history. Yet the bells of our churches continue to ring, bearing witness to the truth and proclaiming the resurrection every day. Palestinian Christians are not marginal. They are not marginal Palestinians, and they should not be marginal Christians because they are the sons and daughters of the first church. We are those who carry the history and heritage, those whose church bells continue to ring to bear witness to the truth. So let us get to the heart of Palestinian liberation theology. Quote, "We call for a global theological movement built on the pillars of God's kingdom, a movement that arises from the contexts and struggles of peoples suffering from colonialism, racism, apartheid, and structural poverty produced by corrupt economic and political systems that serve the interests of the world's empires." My friends, let us remember that this Palestinian liberation theology is grounded in Catholic social teaching. We hear the call for human dignity, the common good, the option for the poor and vulnerable, and asking for our solidarity. This is the heart of Palestinian liberation theology. We challenge the false logic of a neutral or balanced peace, a pax romana, a pax americana, as well as forms of ecclesial diplomacy that do not speak truth to power as a way to evade moral and spiritual responsibility. Take that in for just a second. Together with our partners around the world, we have engaged in self-examination to free ourselves from the residues of colonial theologies which we inherited from the West. Decolonize the Bible. Decolonize your mind. Decolonize your songs. Decolonize your worship. Decolonize your prayer. Be one with the contexts and struggles of all peoples who suffer from colonialism, racism, apartheid, and the structural poverty produced by corrupt economic and political systems. A structural poverty that will eventually affect all of us. Kairos II rejects Christian Zionism unreservedly and also rejects the conflation of Zionism and Judaism. And as I have just spoken, Zionism is simply not in line with any of the Jewish theology that I have profoundly studied, which is really the theology of exile and awaiting Mashiach, who will bring us back to Zion. They say, "We call upon all people of conscience." This is you, dear listener, whoever you are. Believers in God from every faith and persons of conviction to join together in coalitions that safeguard humanity from further descent into the reality of injustice, tyranny, and domination. This is not just about Palestine. This is about all the people of conscience, all the people of conviction, all the believers in God coming together in coalitions to stop the descent into injustice, tyranny, and domination. We call for the creation of an alternative, just and humane world. An alternative, just and humane world order, as the present global system has failed in its most important responsibilities to defend the weak and to preserve international peace and security. So this is a call to each and every one of us, and we had better take this call seriously, because it is not just about Palestine, Palestine, like Syria, is the canary in the coal mine. It is Gaza today, your city, your home, your people tomorrow. And then the extremely important point of holding war criminals to account. In our work for Syria, we saw how incredibly important this is, because without accountability, the same playbook will be used over and over again. We wanted to hold Assad to account. He's gone now, but he's never been punished. And as long as he does not suffer for what he did, as long as war criminals are not held to account, the same playbook will continue to be used. Going back to Kairos II, we repeat and emphasize our appeal to the churches of the world, working together with both religious and secular coalitions to pressure their government to isolate Israel. This is part of what Britain's Chief Rabbi absolutely did not like. To hold it accountable, to impose sanctions, to boycott, and to ban the export of arms, until it complies with international law, ends oppression and tyranny, and adheres to the principles of justice and peace. And we also appeal to the churches of the world to press for the prosecution of war criminals, wherever they may be, under the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. So they are alluding to BDS, boycott, divest, and sanction, which many feel is wrong because it delegitimizes the state of Israel, or makes it seem as if Israel has no right to exist. But states don't have an inherent right to exist. Rights belong to people, not to states. There was Czechoslovakia, and now there's Czech Republic and Slovakia. There was a Yugoslavia that I traveled in as a 20-year-old medical student, and now there is Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Montenegro, Slovenia. I probably haven't got all of them. Nation states chop and change and shift. There are empires rise and fall, borders shrink and grow. Nation states are not real entities and do not have an inherent right to exist. And the question, does a certain state have a right to exist, is always applied only to Israel. Finally, we come to costly solidarity. Quote, "More than ever now is a time for costly solidarity. By its very nature, true solidarity is costly. It has a price. It is a faith-based stance, a human commitment, and a moral responsibility. True solidarity is also the embodiment of our shared humanity and fraternity. Either we live together or we perish together. Today it is Palestine. Tomorrow it will be other marginalized and oppressed people." So this is a moment when each one of us must look into our own hearts and inquire deeply, where is this costly solidarity with the oppressed? Where is our true solidarity? And again, as I quoted from the beginning, our aim is to live as sons and daughters of God in our homeland, without barriers, walls, military occupation, and apartheid, but in a world in which justice, fairness, and equality rule. We envision a future in which our world is free of war, death, sectarianism and tribalism. Where the word of truth rises above the word of power, where legitimacy belongs to peace and justice. We look toward the day when we shall live free in our land, together with all the inhabitants of the earth, in true peace and reconciliation, founded upon justice and equality for all God's creation, where mercy and truth meet, and righteousness and peace kiss each other. This is a taste of the most important points, most important aspects of Palestinian liberation theology. A theology of Sumud, a theology of costly solidarity, a theology that calls upon each one of us to look into our hearts and to see, are we part of building a better world, a world of peace, justice, equality for all God's creation, or do we actually live as part of the problem? Look into your own heart. Thank you, dear ones. Namaste.
Thank you for tuning in to Ayurveda and Spirituality with Alakananda Ma. We hope today's exploration has ignited a spark of curiosity and insight within you. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave us a 5-star review and share it with a friend. For more enlightening discussions and practical wisdom on Ayurveda and spirituality, subscribe and join our Facebook group, Alundi Ayurveda. To allow us to continue sharing valuable content, consider donating to Alundi Ashram. The links will be in the show notes. Until next time, may you walk the path of Ayurveda with grace and embrace the light of spiritual wisdom in your journey.
Trayambakam yajamahe Sugandham